Hi, welcome to Invisible Church, the video Bible study and podcast of St. Paul's Lutheran Church, New Ulm, Minnesota. I'm Pastor Tim Smith. We're studying 1 Corinthians chapter 14.
The last time that we met, we were in 1 Corinthians 13, which is the what chapter? The love chapter. These three remain: faith, hope, and love. Sorry, I said faith, I was going to say Ron, but that's a different couple. So faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these is love. And then in this chapter, we begin with another statement about love. But before we get to that, I'd just like to run this by you. Agree or disagree, tongues, that is speaking in tongues, are a sign meant for unbelievers, not believers. I don't really want an answer, but I'd like you to just let that percolate for a little while. Speaking in tongues, a sign meant for unbelievers, not believers. Another time that I taught this, I won't tell you when, I got a lot of thumbs down over this one. But let's wait and see, okay? So going off on the love portion, keep pursuing love and eagerly seek spiritual gifts, but especially prophecy. And in this chapter, prophecy almost always is simply equivalent to preaching. Yeah, proclaiming law and gospel. Let the law do its work, which is to declare God's holy word, to convict us of our sins, and the gospel to soothe that conviction and to tell us that we're forgiven in Jesus. And as I was researching some things for this chapter this week, I came across, as you might guess, some Pentecostal documents that used quotations from this chapter. And I thought, that doesn't seem right to me as I was reading them. And then I realized that at least three of them were that the individual had clipped or snipped pieces out of a verse to completely change the meaning of the verse. And I've included those in our slides with different pictures, but because I had to do them, I didn't want to reuse somebody else's stuff. So these are my own pictures. But so verse 2, for the person who speaks in a tongue speaks to God, not to people. And therefore, let me finish the verse. For no one understands him, but he speaks mysteries in the Spirit. So does it seem like Paul in this verse thinks that speaking in a tongue is a good thing or not a great thing? I mean, what would be better? It would be better, because he says he speaks to God but not to people, and it seems like he wants us to speak to each other, to people. So, if you're speaking in a tongue, you're not speaking to people. You're just speaking to God. That's good for you, but who else is it good for? Now, look at this verse as it's clipped. For the person who speaks in a tongue speaks to God. He speaks mysteries in the Spirit. And all of a sudden, by just quoting part of the verse, he makes it look like it's like it's the best thing ever. And this is the whole verse again. For the person who speaks in a tongue speaks to God, not to people. For no one understands him. He speaks mysteries in the Spirit. So he's not building up the church. So let's go from there to a more positive image. You recognize that picture? From our church, what do you call that? The first page of a website. That's our homepage image. That's it. The first time I thought, wow, what a picture of Pastor Sharp. That's a great picture. However, the person who prophesies speaks to people things that edify, encourage, and comfort. So remember, prophesying here is speaking law and gospel, it's preaching or teaching, and it edifies, it encourages, and comfort. And can we get on the same page about the word edify? What does edify mean? To build up, yeah. It's to make an edifice, right? A big, strong building. Yeah, that's edify. The one who speaks in a tongue, there really should be almost like a however at the beginning of verse 4, or a but or something. The one who speaks in a tongue edifies himself, but the one who prophesies edifies the church. So which one is doing better for the whole church? The one who's preaching, the one who's prophesying. Yeah. And yet, when I've seen this quoted in certain pages and things, you get this. The one who speaks in a tongue edifies himself. Like, that's your goal. But it's not the goal of the whole passage. In fact, it's taking Paul's point and turning it on its head, taking a verse out of context like this. All right, verse 4 or 5. I would like all of you to speak in tongues, but I would prefer that you prophesy. For the person who prophesies is greater than the one who speaks in tongues, unless he interprets, so that the church may be built up. So Paul does say, I would like it if you were speaking in tongues, because that's a spiritual gift. It was known in Paul's time, evidently at least a lot more common then than it is now. And Paul, I would love it if you would speak in tongues, but I would love it even better if you would prophesy. And I'm going to come back to that point because this verse is sometimes also clipped in like, I'm not thinking of websites, but really they're called memes. They're like a poster where you have an image and just part of a verse. And in this way, I would like all of you to speak in tongues. Like that's all of Paul's point here? It's not all of Paul's point here. Paul makes a very different point. And I wanted to point out the Greek of the beginning of the verse where he says, I would like, that's the verb fellow. I want, I desire. That's what he says there. And then in the second phrase after the comma, in our English it says, but I would prefer. And malon in Greek means even more. So on the one hand, I desire, but even more than that, I desire this other thing. So I would like it if you would all speak in tongues, but more than that, I would love it if you would prophesy. For the person who prophesies is greater than the one who speaks in tongues, unless he interprets, so that the church may be built up. And there's that word edify again. But the speaking in tongues does not edify unless, and what's Paul's unless here? How does speaking in tongues edify the church, or would it? If he interprets, or if somebody else interprets. So if it would be great if we had a tongue, if it could be interpreted, so we would know what it means. And tongues here, in this chapter, it's for me a big question mark. Are we still talking about the tongues of Pentecost Sunday, when the tongues of flame came on their heads and they're speaking in unlearned languages? Like what's the list? Arabs and Cretans and people from the parts of Cyrene near, Cappadocia. Did you tune in on Pentecost Sunday? When I had the little boy, I shouldn't say little, he's not that little. He's going, it's Jameis Martin's. I made him read that list of all the languages at Pentecost. He did a great job. By the way, he's going into 6th grade. And I'm really looking forward to getting him in catechism, because ever since he was about 2, he's been plaguing me, not plaguing, but constantly asking Bible questions, and good, deep Bible questions. Every couple generations we get the great theologian mind coming through, and I desperately don't want to mess up answering this mind's questions as he matures, because I know what kind of a little pebble I am on the stepping stone of his future life. I'm impressed by this young man. Okay, verse 6. And I realize this slide looks more like a football game than a church service. But I believe, and I have to say, I think that's not speaking in tongues. I got a feeling that's healing, faith healing or something like that. But they look like they're kind of having a good time though. Like they're relaxed. But no, I believe he's holding his head, healing his headache or whatever it is, that while he's yelling into his microphone, and he'll turn to the camera and ask for money in a moment or whatever. Say that again, Kurt?
He's not a preacher.
Yeah, he is.
Oh,
The guy with the microphone is.
okay.
Yeah. He's a preacher and a middle linebacker. Yeah, he's really going after the guy. Yeah. Brothers, if I come to you speaking in tongues, what good will I do unless I communicate to you a revelation or some knowledge or some prophecy or some teaching? So it may seem to some Christians like speaking in tongues is the best thing you can do, the greatest gift you can have. But Paul's point is, unless there is some revelation, some knowledge, some teaching, some prophecy, what good is it? It's doing you some good, but is it doing anybody else some good? If I had a special spiritual power, like I could open doors without touching them, or something like that, what good would that do for the church unless I just become the door warden, right? It's not going to do a lot of good for anybody, and it would be kind of a cool thing, and people might come from miles around to see the pastor who can open doors with the power of his mind. But yes.
Like my children used to do that at Walmart. Okay.
Oh,
Just before they got to the door, they would wave and the doors would open.
well, I still do that
See?
for those doors. Well, of course, how can you not?
Yeah.
Especially
Force push.
in my life, it corresponds to how recently have I watched any Star Wars movie that I will inevitably make the door open. You got to do that. Yeah. It's Bush. Okay. Wasn't he vice president? What? No, Forrest Bush. Even lifeless instruments that produce sound, such as a flute or a harp, if they do not make the notes distinct from one another, how will anyone know what is being played on the flute or the harp? Now, I've got a feeling that these two professional ladies do make distinct sounds on the flute and the harp. I'll bet they make good money doing that. But let's take this out of the realm of the flute and the harp, because even when one of my sons played flute in middle school and high school, and he actually always sounded pretty good. But can you imagine a child in your household learning, let's say, the clarinet? And what's the first word that comes to your mind when you think new clarinetist? Squeak, right? Do, or whatever. And the same of a violin, things come out that, and unless you're a very understanding parent, and unless you really know the song Hot Cross Buns, you're not going to know what song it is that they're trying to play as they're going along. Yeah, exactly. Oh, what years those, when all four were in band at the same time. Anyway. And never the same song being practiced at the same time. Why couldn't they have at least become a group? But, yeah. There was something else I was going to say in here is, yes, Jeff.
So this is obviously something that helps us understand speaking in tongues.
Right.
The question is, notes distinct from one another. How does that concept?
Yeah, well, because language makes sense, and individual sounds and utterances, there are languages in the world today that use sounds you and I don't make. There are some languages that use clicks and whirs and things like that, and even if I spell the woman's name, Nina, okay? Nina, right? But what if I put a tilde, a little squiggly line over the N? That's not over the N. That's not Nina. It's now system. Nina. So, and in American English, most of us don't acknowledge characters that are used in other alphabets. The French have a letter C with a thing underneath it, a little squiggle, and there are different things like that where we don't really do that in English. And if you get into Cyrillic alphabet and things like that, there's all kinds of sounds that we don't really use. In the book of Judges, you have a difference in pronunciation between shibboleth and sibboleth. Same word, just one tribe wasn't able to pronounce their SHs very well. So it would kind of come out more like Thiboleth. Do you know that Spain has a north and a south pronunciation? And in the north, they would call the south Andalusia. But in the south, where they live in Andalusia, they can't say it. They say Andalusia, because it's a pronunciation difference. And so we have the same thing. I was in Tennessee for 10 days, and there's a lot of pronunciation differences there. All right, we're going to move into verse 8. If the trumpet makes an uncertain sound, who will get ready for battle? A bugler has all kinds of different calls. And if he's got the wrong tune, if he plays taps, we're not getting up, we're going to bed. And things like that. So also I should say also that when was the last time the bugle got used in the Army or the Navy? Probably about 10 minutes ago. It's still used even today. That photograph, anybody want to take a guess at when that photograph was taken? It was a very distinctive tense, though. Yeah, I think that's actually Vietnam that you're looking at there. Yeah. Yeah, for one thing, his hair is kind of a giveaway as early 70s. So yeah, I think that this is actually Vietnam, and bugles are still even used. Reveille still played aboard ship today over the loudspeaker of the ship, and so forth. So, yeah, and it really does. I mean, if you have that voice over a ship over the intercom system, you know what that's called? It's called a tannoy. Which I kind of wonder if that's an abbreviation for, what's it for? It's to annoy, tannoy. But it's called a tannoy, the wah, 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 wah voice that comes over. If you listen to that all day and then you go to bed, and if that voice said, oh, it's 5 a.m., boy, it's time to get up now, would you even listen to it? But, okay, that now I know that that's for me. So it's important to still have the bugle call and to have that. So also, verse 9, so also with you, unless you use your tongue to produce intelligible speech, how will anyone know what is being spoken? To be sure, you will be speaking only into the air. So here again, you got to say something with your words that makes sense. Otherwise, people aren't going to know what you're talking about. I sometimes get flustered in a sermon. And you lose your place. I'm thinking ahead too far. And then, did the sentence I just spoke make any sense? You get that thought in your head. And I was taught by one professor at college, not at seminary, who said you should always have a generic paragraph. So if you get lost in a sermon, you can go to that paragraph that you have memorized and just blurt it out without thinking. And in your mind, you can figure out where you were and get back to where you were again. I've never been able to do that. I don't know how he did that, but he suggested that we do that. And I know that once in a while I have actually looked down at my notes and said, where are we? And I'd rather just admit it and just say, oh, I lost my place. And then what my actual sermon professor said at the seminary, which was, just go back into the Bible and read the verse again. And, let's just get back into it. But if it's not intelligible at all, who will benefit? There are perhaps ever so many kinds of languages in the world, and not one of them is without meaning. Although to some of us, some languages, I have no idea what they're saying, and are they really saying anything? And even can I say proverbial caveman grunts? They mean something, There are some tribes in the Indian Ocean, for example, that have never had encounters with modern man. In fact, they even throw spears at helicopters. And they have a language of some kind, even though I wouldn't be able to understand it. It's not Polynesian, it's not Indian, it's not Maori or anything like that. It's whatever they speak, but it makes sense to them. Obviously it makes sense to them. Accordingly, if I do not understand the language, I will be a foreigner to the speaker, and he will be a foreigner to me. This is a Persian soldier from the Ottoman Empire around the time of the Crimean War, which is about 1850. And that has nothing to do with the chapter, except that he's a foreigner. But I wanted to point something out to him, because if this guy were talking to me, I would mostly be nervous about that cutlass in his hand, that curved sword, or scimitar, whatever that counts. I think it's a cutlass. But look at his other hand. Do you remember from maybe the King James Version, or from, say, Handel's Messiah, or who wrote the Elijah, Felix Mendelssohn, or one of those other oratorios? Do you remember talking about the Lord who is my shield and my buckler? My buckler? That's what that little tiny shield is. A little shield the size of a dinner plate. And it takes the whole inside of the shield to hold the strap. But it's no bigger than that. Because how could you really fight a sword fight with a gigantic body-sized Roman shield? You're not going to. So for that kind of fighting, a guy had to hold a buckler, which really is just a piece of metal. You're really hitting the sword strikes, not really defending yourself as so much as just making sure you don't get hurt too badly. But that's what a buckler really is. And it does occur in the Bible, the word buckler. I came across it when I was translating Jeremiah and I think Isaiah, but the idea of the buckler. So anyway, okay, back to 1 Corinthians. Sorry. So also with you, since you are eager for spiritual gifts, seek to use them abundantly in a way that will build up the church. So it's good that you're seeking spiritual gifts, whatever the gift is, whether it's tongues or administration or prophecy or teaching or whatever. That's a wonderful gift to pursue, and may God give it to you. But seek them and seek to use them in a way that'll build up the church. So it's not about you, it's about the church. Now, this is very close to an image I found online. That's a woman in water. I think she's praying. But here's another one where they're in the image I found, which is not this image. I found the passage abbreviated. So, verses 13 and 14. That is why a person who speaks in a tongue should pray that he may interpret. For if I pray in a tongue, my spirit prays, but my understanding is unfruitful. So in context, is Paul in favor of speaking in tongues in these verses, or not so much? Not so much, right? But look at this. This is why a person who speaks in a tongue should pray. For if I pray in a tongue, my spirit prays. Oh, how wonderful. Just by clipping off some of the verse, you completely change the meaning of the passage. And that looks exactly like a poster I would expect to see, in somebody's cubicle somewhere. Right? But that is why a person who speaks in a tongue should pray that he may interpret. For if I pray in a tongue, my spirit prays, but my understanding is unfruitful. So just continuing, or should I just pause? And does anybody have a question or anything so far? And we're kind of zipping through these, and I want to make sure I'm not going too fast or too slow or anything. Lynn?
Why did God have Paul say, I wish I could speak in tongues? That confuses me.
Oh, let's go back to that. Yeah. Well,
I understand what you're saying there.
Mm-hmm.
Why would we speak in tongues?
Well, maybe you should not focus on the tongue so much as that's the For Paul, it's the least of the spiritual gifts. So I wish everybody had a spiritual gift. And it seems like, although we kind of think that tongues is the wow pinnacle of spiritual gifts. But for Paul, that's more like entry level spiritual gifts. And there are more beneficial spiritual gifts than that. Because one thing is that above tongues, the next one up would be interpreting tongues. Because what good is tongues unless you can interpret? Therefore, interpretation is more useful than tongues. And then more useful than that is this and this and this and this and this. So I would love every single farm to have a cement foundation for those cows. But more than that, I'd like you also to have walls and a roof. You know, what makes a good barn? You know, cement for hygienic and health reasons, but walls and a roof would be better. You know, so if that helps.
You've been listening to Invisible Church, the Bible study podcast from St. Paul's Lutheran Church, New Ulm, Minnesota.